Thank you, Travis. Okay, I'm going to move this down a little bit. Yes, my name is Athena Frasca. I'm the Watershed Restoration Coordinator for Bringing Baffin Back and the Baffin Bay watershed as a whole, which if you're not familiar with it after people mentioning it today, I'll show you some maps here in a second. So the Bringing Baffin Back initiative is a partnership between the Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries Program and Harte Research Institute and supported by a lot of other partners and stakeholders, many of whom are in this room, including the Nueces River Authority, the Texas Water Resource Institute, CCA, Celanese, the list just goes on. So I'll mention more of them. You'll see more logos throughout the presentation, but I want to call out the broad breadth of this group. It's not just Harte Research Institute, and it's not just me and my colleagues. There are many, many others, other people who have been working really hard on this project for years. So a little bit of intro on Baffin Bay. If you're not familiar with it, you'll learn a little bit more, and if you are, enjoy a couple photos and maps, and hopefully you learn a couple of new facts. Baffin Bay is the most isolated bay on the Texas coast. It is separated from the rest of the Laguna Madre and from the Gulf of Mexico, and has very little circulation comparative to the other bays on the coast. So that contributes to its super salty, hypersaline environment. It is bordered by the longest undeveloped barrier island in the world, which I think most of us are familiar with. And that watershed area that contributes fresh water to Baffin Bay is 1.5 million acres. So really, really big. And each of those fingers of the bay has fairly distinct geology and soil types. And those watersheds, each of those three smaller sub-watersheds are really, really different from the next. So that contributes to Baffin Bay being not only rural and isolated, but also very, very unique in terms of biodiversity. How many times can I say unique? So if you watch that video on the side, it's a little bit hard to see, and part of that is just because Baffin Bay has very pigmented water most of the time. I think it's frozen now, but that is a video of some of the diversity of life that you can see that live in the serpulid reefs in Baffin Bay, and those are amazing fish habitats. They're the same type of worms that you see if you go to the beach and you find rocks with little worm casings on them, but this specific species is very unique to Baffin Bay and found in only one or two other systems in the world. These reefs are really ancient, and that middle video, which is playing now, is a close-up microscope image of some of those live worms pulsing in and out. So those rocky reef systems that have built up over the last millennia are really, really important to fish, but also contribute to some of the risks if you go out in your boat and you hit one, propeller damage and other boat damage. So that's another thing that makes Baffin really unique. Nearly 80% of the seagrass beds in Texas are found in the Laguna Madre and Baffin Bay. And that is, of course, something that draws people here and is also something that we've been watching decline over the years. So I'll mention that a little bit later, but some of what makes it a really great spot to fish and just go and observe wildlife as well. A little bit more about our wildlife there. It's an amazing place for birding and for fishing and contributes about $75 million annually to the local economy. And that number is from a few years ago, so I'm sure it has actually increased since then. But some great photos there. And some other ones. In the top left there, that is, I believe it's 60.5 inches long. It's a world record, or state record, excuse me, fish caught in 2011. So there's some really, really big fish down in Baffin, as well as some other pretty incredible wildlife. That kind of worm-like thing is actually the serpulid worm. It always reminds me of the creature from Alien or maybe from Dune. But they're really, really small. Under the microscope, they look incredible. And some of the other great species. The King Ranch has hosted nilgai for a long time down there, and if you're driving around, you might see those, as well as occasionally zebras or just plain old deer as well. And down in the bottom right corner, that is a chunk of the serpulid reef. So it kind of looks like ramen noodles, very rocky and calcified, but you can see there's a lot of stuff growing on the top, and you can imagine how many barnacles and other smaller organisms would find great habitat there. So with all that said, and you've heard this from some other folks today, there are a number of conservation challenges facing Baffin Bay. The three biggest are brown tide algal blooms or harmful algal blooms. You may have heard of red tide. Brown tide is very similar to red tide, except it does not have any human health toxicity. So you can breathe in the area and you're not going to have any of that respiratory irritation that you might experience with red tide, but it still has a really negative effect on the rest of the environment, and so it is still considered a harmful algal bloom or HAB. Those algal blooms contribute to mass fish kill events and loss of seagrass, which again is critical fish habitat in Baffin Bay and the Upper Laguna. So we have been monitoring these conditions in Baffin Bay for the last couple decades, but all of this community attention really came to a front in 2012. There was a really intense and long algal bloom, and community concerns from anglers and from people that live around the bay really brought this to a head. So researchers at the Harte Research Institute, as well as our partners with the Coastal Bend Basin Estuaries Program and CCA, and even various counties in the area, including Clayburgh County, came together to find out more. There wasn't enough data. Data was too limited, and we didn't understand the drivers of what these brown tide blooms were. This began an ongoing water quality study that began in 2013 with 18 citizen scientist volunteers who would go out and sample 6 to 9 sites per month, and we are still sampling those sites. So we have our next sampling trip goes out on July 2nd, and we sample those sites on the map that are pinpointed there. Some of our partners also sample sites further up into the watershed and some of our tributary sites, those streams that actually contribute water to the bay. And we also look at data that other partners collect, especially Texas Parks and Wildlife up and down the Laguna Madre. So some of those findings showed that nitrogen was a lot higher in Baffin Bay than in other Texas bays. So this is kind of a heat map of some of that earlier data, and we've been able to correlate these findings over time. It is so significantly higher that we correlate that with intense eutrophication and overgrowth of algae. Oops, I think I might have just messed that up. That's okay, I'll just hold it. So anyway, there is a lot of algae growth and overgrowth in that area, and lots of phytoplankton. And that little yellow area circled there is a microscopic image of brown tide, which again is the major concern in Baffin. But not all phytoplankton is bad. So just want to point that out. I think whenever I say the word phytoplankton, people kind of step back. Thanks, Travis. But it's not actually such a bad thing. We just are concerned about the brown tide. So high nitrogen, as well as isotopic data which suggests that a lot of the watershed and primarily human sources of pollution are present here too. I'll talk about that more in a moment, and that also builds off of what you heard from Scott and some others earlier today. But all fingers are pointing towards watershed-based nutrient pollution, not so much things happening in the water, natural systems that are separate from those algal blooms. Some other studies by our partners have shown that there is a localized increase in chlorophyll in Baffin Bay, as well as decreased dissolved oxygen. And again, all of those things kind of point toward eutrophication. As the algal bloom increases, that starts to kill the seagrass by shading it out. As that decomposes, the fish, dies and decomposes, the fish lose habitat, and then as that cycle of decomposition occurs, the dissolved oxygen decreases, and that kind of feeds itself back. The fish die, less oxygen, and then the whole system kind of begins to deteriorate. So, yes, I thought I had one more slide after that, but these are the base issues that have instigated our interest in the Baffin Bay watershed rather than just focusing on the water quality in the bay and in the upper laguna. So moving a little bit out, scaling out a lot, this is a map that I love to show of all of the watersheds in the US. They're organized by the largest tributaries. So this isn't showing every single subwatershed, but those that contribute to the largest river or largest water body per watershed area. And we're down at the very, very bottom. That whole pink area is the Mississippi River watershed, which takes up obviously the very most space. But we are all very, very much interconnected by these watersheds. And I like that this really shows that political boundaries, state boundaries, are not as relevant when we're thinking about the flow of water. So zooming into Baffin Bay's watershed, I talked a little bit about everything that makes Baffin Bay special. Its watershed is equally interesting. It's a very large area and is much drier on the west side than on the east side. Kind of nice precipitation gradient is present here and has a lot of smaller cities and towns scattered throughout it. The three main tributaries to Baffin Bay are Petronilla Creek, Los Olmos Creek, and San Fernando Creek. And Petronilla Creek and San Fernando Creek are both represented here by a red line, which some of the other maps that we saw today also showed those red lines representing impairments. And in this case, the impairment is for recreational use. So there's too much bacteria or E. coli present in the water. And correlated with that, there are too many nutrients in the water, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus, to make these creeks healthy for contact recreation, as well as they don't contribute very much clean, healthy water to the rest of the bay system. So potential sources of those impairments of that watershed pollution, both bacterial and nutrient-based, are point source pollution and non-point source pollution. And this is a pretty similar list to Scott's from earlier, but point source pollution is typically wastewater treatment plants, factories with an outfall, something that you can point your finger at and identify as contributing a very specific source of waste. Non-point source pollution are more scattered. It's lots of little things that contribute to a bigger issue. That includes failing septic tanks, fertilizer runoff, stormwater runoff, animal waste, including agricultural, but also wildlife, and our good friends, the little feral hogs, which I always think this picture is kind of cute of them, but generally we are not big fans. And illegal trash dumping. So this, I hope I can use my laser. This here is a photo that was taken aerially, I believe, during a survey from the Coastal Bend Basin Estuaries Program and the River Authority. But this is all trash, and this is in one of the tributaries to Baffin Bay. So it's pretty striking that that much trash can build up over time and would certainly contribute a pretty big amount of pollution to that water body. So a little taste, we know from multiple approaches, including bacterial source tracking and various spatial analyses, that each of these pollutants contributes a lot to Baffin Bay's watershed, but we've identified septic tanks as a pretty big one, as well as general stormwater runoff, and those are two of our bigger focus points right now. So thinking about all of those factors, all of those different point and non-point source pollution issues and all of those unique parts of the environment that we do want to protect, what do we actually do about that? And we talked earlier about the TMDLs and the implementation plans, as well as the watershed protection plan for San Fernando Creek and Petronilla Creek. And this is broken down a little bit more. So phase one is watershed and bay research and data collection. That is what began in 2013 and was building upon some of the previous work that our partners had been doing. And that is continuing on, so and that will continue for the course of this project and hopefully longer. We're in phase two right now. This is our beginning watershed restoration and management phase. We have a very active Baffin Bay stakeholder group. We are working on implementing that watershed protection plan that was written in 2022 and accepted by the EPA in 2023. And we're beginning to see some real activity happening in the watershed in terms of restoration, land management, and infrastructure projects. So I'll talk about those success stories more in a second. We're also focusing and putting a lot more attention towards fostering stewardship in the greater watershed, and especially with our younger generations, with school-age kids and college students. And that's something that we hope will continue, again, throughout the course of this project, but beyond. And moving into phase 3, we are hoping to start doing more habitat restoration on the ground, including things like planting more seagrass and restoring some stream banks. Hopefully we start seeing some of those constructed wetlands being actually implemented and being able to measure those effects through our data collection. Okay, bear with me. These slides will be a little bit more interactive, and I'm not sure how quickly they'll move. So this is a little roadmap of some of our restoration success stories. Again, Harte Research Institute is at the forefront of driving a lot of these projects, but we certainly are not doing all of them by ourselves. We have a lot of really great partners who are on the ground doing these and helping fund these at all levels. So I'll focus on a couple of these a little bit more, but then we'll run through them all one more time at the end. If we'll switch slides. We'll see. Okay. My slide wasn't going. Okay, perfect. So the first one I want to highlight is implementation of conservation best management practices on agricultural land. So we are very thankful for great partnership with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board. And each county in Texas has their own soil and water conservation district. We work very closely with the ones in our watershed, particularly the Clayburgh-Kennedy Soil and Water Conservation District. And they recently hired a district conservation technician whose job is to work cooperatively with each of the counties in the watershed to actually implement those water quality management plans, which are basically site-specific plans for implementing best management practices. So I know that's a lot of technical jargon probably, but they're doing things like adding an alternate water source to agricultural land so that cattle and livestock are not using the bathroom in the creek where they're drinking water, but they're drinking water away from the creek and then doing their business in that area. So some of those things might feel like small site-specific issues, but for this watershed, it's been already making a very big difference. Cheyenne, who is running that program, has run out of funding in the first 3 months of her work, and we've had to seek more funding to implement those water quality management plans. So that's a big success, and we're also working with a number of other entities in the area to get similar projects going that will help producers and landowners implement best management practices on their private property, and then manage that over time to both improve their practices as well as improve water quality. Next up, I want to highlight a project that the Coastal Bend Basin Estuaries Program and the River Authority have been working on, as well as some of our friends at the Texas Water Resource Institute. And this is assistance for septic system inspection and replacement. So those stars on the map are just representative of some of the hot spots of the septic system replacement program. And this is taking different forms over time. The Texas Water Resource Institute is focused on education, whereas the Coastal Bend Basin Estuaries Program and River Authority are focused on actual inspection and replacement of those systems. But there are a lot of septic tanks that need to be replaced throughout the watershed. They're aging, and some of the soil types in the watershed are not conducive to holding those systems in place and filtering out the waste in the long term. So this program is identifying landowners and homeowners who need that assistance and ranking them through a system that our partners have put together, and eventually moving throughout the watershed to provide those inspections and replacements. It's a pretty expensive thing to do, and I'm really excited that we've been moving forward with this project and actually getting some work done. So at least 40 homeowners have been part of this program so far, and we're hoping to expand that as funding allows and as this project continues to be successful. So big thanks to all of our partners for that. And finally, I want to highlight some of our conservation education programs. This is just one little sliver of what we've been working on, but it was recent and pretty exciting. We partnered with the Texas Brigades, which is a youth conservation leadership camp program. They have camps all across the state. Many of them are 5-day overnight camps, but we recently partnered with them to host a 1-day conservation education camp at Baffin Bay. And many of the people in this room were volunteers at that camp. It was a lot of fun, and we're gonna do it again this spring. But we had fishing stations, boating stations, kind of watershed dynamics based stations, had microscopes out, collected water quality samples, went birding, and overall kind of tried to touch on a lot of the most important points of what makes Baffin Bay special, what makes the watershed special, and how we are researching that and collecting information. So we had about 30 attendees at that camp and over 30 volunteers, which was really fantastic. We're also working on a mailer campaign, so we're sending out postcard mailers to landowners throughout the watershed, as well as trying to increase our social media presence, sending out newsletters, and hosting workshops in collaboration with a lot of our partners as well. So there's a little bit more on here. We're very supportive of the Up to You program, which is working on reducing illegal dumping in the coastal bend, but also in the watershed. And just to highlight some of their work in the past couple years, they've removed 416 tons of waste from the watershed. That's under an overpass, became quite a tire dump over time. And that really didn't even make a dent in some of the waste removal issues and illegal dumping that happens in the watershed. So that's something we'll continue in some capacity over time, but very excited for that number, even though it's just a small piece of the puzzle. Our partners are also working on implementing rain gardens, which we've learned a lot about nature-based solutions today. Rain gardens are great examples of that and great at schools and libraries. And we're working on, or our partners are working on implementing some more rain gardens throughout this kind of Kingsville, Sarita, Rivera area of the watershed. So looking forward to seeing those come to fruition here soon too. I also want to mention that this has been in the works for a while, but one of our other partners, the Aguanita project, is working on designing a 240-acre constructed wetland that will eventually help remove some pollutants from Petronilla Creek. So again, one of the nature-based solutions that we learned about today, and that will be located in a really critical spot to filter some of the wastewater, not just wastewater, but polluted water coming down through Petronilla Creek and straight into Baffin. And then this is one of the examples of our mailers. So pretty excited about all the work that we're working on and moving forward with. I think there's a lot more to do. We haven't done a lot of work with feral hogs yet. And we also have a lot more, as we've learned about today, to focus on regarding wastewater and stormwater. That's all I have for you all today. If you have questions after this, please feel free to reach out or follow along with us on social media. And yeah, thank you.
Are there any questions for Athena from the audience?
Feel free to email if you have them later too.
We have one.
How much money do you need to get it all done?
I have heard this was an estimate from last year, but over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, to get every single project done in our watershed protection plan, that's looking like about $600 million. We're lucky to have some pretty great investments already, but that is a lot of funding, and we recognize that we'll just start to chip away at pieces of the puzzle. Our watershed protection plan lays out estimates for the cost of each project and looks at things on a 10-year time frame. So I think in some project capacities, or in some project areas, that funding will accelerate faster than others. Some of it, like waste removal from pets in parks, or pet waste in parks, is going to be smaller dollar amounts but can make a big impact per area. And then other things like constructed wetlands or big stormwater runoff projects will cost more and take a little bit longer, but may also make a big impact in their own right.
Oh, come on up. So we do have one great question. I'm sure this is a City of Portland staff. Yes, the microphone is back together and it is okay. We didn't break it. So
Good. Yes, sorry about that. And I guess to build off that previous question, if you guys are interested in partnering on any projects in the Baffin Bay watershed, we'd love to support that and are always looking for more people to work with, more stakeholders to incorporate into our planning processes, and of course, more funding.
Yeah, I was just wondering why is there so much illegal dumping? Is it a mindset, or in your experience, what's the reason for that so much?
Yeah, I wish Catherine Tunnell was still here. She would be a great person to answer that. And if Adrian Hilmy from the Coastal Bend Basin Estuaries Program wants to jump in, that would be great. But in my experience in the watershed and working with stakeholders so far, I think it is a little bit of a mindset. Sometimes dumps are really far away. There's not always a centralized waste removal system in some of the smaller and more rural areas, which makes sense. And same for recycling and other kind of things that we take for granted in city urban areas. And I think it's also something like you see an overpass and it's a little bit out of the way. You don't think anyone else is going to see it. Again, mindset. Adrian, do you have any insight to add?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, but a lot of it has to do with cost and difficulty in getting those bulk, especially the bulk waste items to a landfill. So in Corpus Christi, we're very fortunate. We have a landfill that's relatively nearby, but there's also programs like the Litter Critter program, which rotates around the city and makes it very accessible for residents to bring some of their bulky items to more convenient locations throughout the city, and then the city helps dispose of those properly at the landfill. In a lot of these rural communities, those programs just aren't available. And not to mention in many communities, especially unincorporated communities, those services are either not provided and or the residents are less economically advantaged, I guess. And so their ability to load up a truck, load up a trailer to get those items to a landfill, not just the distance needed to get them there being a challenge, but just the cost of getting there is a challenge. So oftentimes the ditch, the overpass becomes the unofficial landfill.
One other thing to mention too is a lot of this area is prone to very sporadic flash flooding, and I think this past couple of days has been a good example of that. And if you have any of that waste, that even if you intend to remove it, it definitely gets washed away at times. And these creeks are known to flood very quickly and unexpectedly. So I think that is a big factor, just to give people some more credit back. The program that I mentioned, Up to You, has done a really great job of educating people along the way. So some of that is in schools, some of that is at waste removal events, and I think that has already made a big difference. Like I said, there's a lot more education and a lot more waste removal to do, but hopefully we're picking away and chipping away at some of that mindset.
I have a question for Adrian. I apologize, I put you on the spot here. Lori Flores with the River Authority runs the Art Up to You Plus program. And I believe we ran out of funding because it was such a great need. In just a few months, we were planning for a couple of years worth of this project, and we ran out of funding pretty quickly. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so the need is so great. So this Up to You Plus campaign or program, I think, is in its third year now, and we've had to seek additional funding multiple times to cover the disposal fees. And so that program consists of bringing dumpsters into these communities and providing a disposal service free of charge. Often, so when we wrote the grant and we received the funding, I think we planned on emptying the dumpsters 1, 2 to 3 times over a 2-week period. We have oftentimes been needing to empty these dumpsters on a daily basis in some of these communities. And we've returned to those communities over the course of, in subsequent years, and the demand is still there. And so, while funding has been available and we've been fortunate in being able to acquire additional funding, both from some of the funding agencies as well as private and industry partners, this is an area of great need in a service that is really needed in a lot of these communities. And so, yes, Travis, we're always searching for more funding for these. This is a type of program that's going to require continued support to be able to maintain. And so, if anybody is interested in helping support it, we'd love to have that conversation.
You mentioned that septic systems are part of the problem. Is it just the old systems? The picture you showed looked like a new anaerobic septic system. The reason I ask is it's happening all across Texas. After COVID and other things, more and more people are building the house in the country, more septic systems coming in. Are the new systems part of this problem, or is it just the old septic systems?
I don't want to say it's not every single, old system, and not that the new systems can't contribute, but I believe most of our focus is on the older systems. But I think it is worth saying too that you have to be conscientious about the water table and other soil-based factors. I'm definitely no expert in installing septic systems, and that was a newer system. But in the inspections that have been done, pretty much every single system that has been inspected so far has needed to be replaced. And we estimate that there are at least 10,000 septic systems in the watershed, and there are likely more than that, and likely some properties that don't have septic systems at all. Good question.
As far as this program goes, the emphasis has been on old failing systems that were either permitted and not maintained, or even many of these systems were kind of self-made systems as well, and were never permitted. But having said that, septic systems are great at removing bacteria, but the nutrients are less efficient at removing nutrients. And one of the big problems with Baffin Bay is all the nutrient loading. And so, especially for systems that are in close proximity to receiving water bodies, that nutrient treatment is not necessarily occurring as needed. Having said that, as far as the permitting process, there aren't nutrient criteria currently for septic systems, at least that I'm aware of. It's all based on BODs and bacteria. So that's part of the equation.
Yeah. Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, we were excited. So we work with, I think we have 3 programs going between the CBP, EPA, and the TCQ for septic replacements. And I think we're going to get 100 done over the next 2 years, which sounds really awesome. And we're really proud of that hard work. But like Athena said, there's over 10,000, and that's pre-COVID estimate number. That doesn't count anything new. And one of the issues that we see when we're driving through, we had our earlier topic about the regional wastewater plant, is you can drive over in western Nueces County where all these new houses and stuff, they're great, beautiful houses, but you can see every septic system as you drive through those communities. So yesterday with a couple of inches of rain, where do you think that standing water ended up?
Yeah, very good point. And I do want to mention, if you want more information on this, please shoot me an email. But we will be hosting 2 septic tank maintenance workshops in August. We're still settling the dates, but it looks like August 13th and 14th right now. We'll have one of them in Jim Wells County and then one of them closer down to Baffin Bay in Rivera. So these will be free workshops hosted in collaboration with Texas AgriLife Extension. And that will kind of just give an overview of how to maintain your septic system between pump outs, between needing to replace them. And yeah, please spread the word if you have stakeholders or anyone else that might be interested in that.
Any other questions or comments?
Great, thank you all.
Thank you, Athena.